started. Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you for coming back. Starting our first half of the year programs. There's a complete list up there if you didn't already get it from the newsletter. Feel free to sign up at the circulation desk on your way out for any additional classes. All classes from January through June will be for 1 credit of CLE, 1 general credit of CLE. So that is good to know. We're excited. We have Steve Stoltz with us. Steve is our IT consultant here at the library, and this is a follow-up from last year. He did a program on setting up a network for small law offices. So today he's going to talk about the timely topic of keeping your law office safe. And if you haven't already, the handouts are up here, evaluation sheets, and I just need your Supreme Court number to get you CLE credit.
All right.
Take it away.
Good morning.
Morning.
So this is a timely topic. It's in the news a lot. So we're going to talk about IT security and just kind of, it'll be sort of an overview. We'll go into depth a little bit, but I also want to answer questions because people didn't have a lot of questions about this. My focus is on small office, home office. So small business. So the IT security discipline in an enterprise, in a very large law firm, is much different than what I would address. So what I'm addressing really tends to apply to small office, home office, and businesses with 50 or fewer computers. So a little bit about me. I've been doing IT since 1987. Back then, there was no such thing as IT. We called it computer science for business. And started off as a programmer for a medical facility in Clintonville, right out of college. Graduated in 1991, and did some programming for a number of years. And 1987. 1991, I started my IT consulting practice, and then went full-time in 1993, and have been supporting small office and small business IT shops in Central Ohio since then. So I guess my focus is professional companies. I do doctors, dentists, and lawyers, and then I do have a couple of small manufacturing facilities that I do work for, and one retail organization, and the library. I've been here at the library since either 91 or 93. And there've been a lot of changes. There've been a lot of things that have happened through the years that have caused IT security to really come into the forefront as being something that we all need to pay attention to. So let's just start with the list. Things that you want to do right away. I say do these things today. So let's talk about your internet router. It really is the largest attack surface on your network because that's where the bad guys can come in. That's where you get your internet service. And so your router is really the gateway to your network. And so you want to make sure your router is modern. I say if it's older than 2 years old, you want to replace it because they really are considered to be, hello, go ahead and have a seat. They really are considered these days to be commodities. And they're so inexpensive that router manufacturers don't really put a lot of time into updating them the way they should. So there's some settings that you want to double check on your router. If you're one of those folks that bought a router at the store, plugged it in, and just started using it, some of these settings are probably not set right. And if they're not set right, it can compromise your network. The bad guys will find you, and they'll try to hack in. So number one, make sure you have a strong password. Change the password from the default to something that's strong that nobody's going to guess if they know you. There's an option in your router called WAN administration. WAN stands for Wide Area Network. Basically it means internet. You want to turn that off. There's something called UPnP, that stands for Universal Plug and Play. That was a protocol that was developed by Sony years ago for folks that do online gaming. And that option found its way into the mainstream router market, but it's buggy. and it's definitely a security risk, so you want to turn that off. WPS is a function that was very useful at one time, but now it's considered to be dangerous. That's a way for somebody to connect to your router without having to know your password, your Wi-Fi password. Basically, you push a button on the router that's labeled WPS, and for a period of several seconds, anybody can connect to the router. But there are some bugs in there, so you want to turn that off. Turn off respond to WAN ping. You just don't want to advertise that you're there. So if you turn that off, you'll be stealthy. And then as far as your Wi-Fi goes, there are different levels of encryption, and you want to be using WPA2 or better. So there's a WPA2 Enterprise, there's a WPA2 Personal. Any of the WPA2s will work well. And give your Wi-Fi a strong password. The last thing you want to do is have your network be open with no password, because number one, anybody can connect. And number two, your Wi-Fi signal is not encrypted. So the password for Wi-Fi does two things. It lets people in, and it's also used as an encryption key to encrypt the traffic. So if you don't have a Wi-Fi password, your traffic, anything you do on your computer is being broadcast wirelessly in the clear. And people, especially at public hotspots, coffee shops and hotels and airports, there are bad guys lurking that will use sniffers, and they can intercept what you're doing and they can see what you're typing. So definitely want to use a strong password on your office Wi-Fi. And if you're in a public location and using a Wi-Fi that has no password, you want to be using what's called a VPN, or a virtual private network. And I should have made a note on here, I don't think that I did, but a VPN will encrypt your data if the Wi-Fi doesn't. And that just helps with privacy. Don't call your Wi-Fi network anything that reveals the make and model of the router, because hackers can see that. And if there's a known vulnerability, they'll know what make and model router you have. Also, don't use a Wi-Fi name that references the name of your business or your name, because then people know people are out to get you for some reason. They see your name or your business name, and they might try a little harder to get into your network. So make it something sort of generic. Update your router firmware. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Routers really are a commodity, and they don't get updated very often. But if the router is newer, less than 2 years old, usually there will be updates that the manufacturer will make available to fix security problems, to add features and that sort of thing. So, and you'll just go to the manufacturer's website for your router and just see if there are any updates there. And if there are, there'll be directions there on how to download the update and apply it to your router. And then lastly, if your router is more than 2 years old, I would say definitely replace it. So this is sort of technical, but there's a list you can take home, and if you know your password to get into your router at home or at your office, and you don't have an IT person, definitely go in and look for these settings and adjust them accordingly. Just because the internet is such, it's just wrought with people trying to infect systems. And we were talking a little bit earlier before this started about something we call internet background radiation. And all it is all of the people trying to gain access to systems. They're randomly looking for open systems. And so there's a test that Steve Gibson with Gibson Research, somebody I listen to, who I respect as a security professional, has talked about. If you take a computer and put it on the internet with no router, within 5 minutes, it's very likely somebody will have found that computer and will be actively trying to hack in. It takes almost no time at all. Yes?
When I'm down in court, I have my laptop and I go into the Franklin County, the internet access is open.
Is it open? Okay.
Yeah, the building is open, through AT&T and you just click in. So I guess, I mean, I have a VPS system,
VPN.
what is it called?
VPN.
VPN
Yeah,
system. So do I turn that on first before I go into the Franklin County Open Internet?
I would, and if you can't get in with it turned on, turn it off, connect, and then turn it on right away.
Okay.
Yeah.
But do you realize that the courthouse has its own system that we can just log into?
Yeah. A lot of, just from the standpoint of logistics, a lot of organizations have that because it's too difficult to reach out to absolutely everybody to convey a password.
Well, here at the law library, you can click in. I don't know if that's the same thing I click in when I'm at the courthouse. I mean,
It's a different network,
It's a
but
different
same
network.
kind of thing. It's open, yeah.
It's
Because
open.
again, you know, we serve the public. We don't have a specific set of people that come in here that we can distribute a password to. So anybody has to be able to
So the
connect.
bottom line is don't use your system unless you have that extra,
The VPN,
the VPN.
yeah. And there are a lot of VPN services out there.
Yeah.
Some of them are free. Don't use any of the free services.
Well, I use the Hide My Ass service.
Oh, I've heard of that one, yeah.
Is that a good service?
I don't know, but I've heard of it.
I mean, I've used it internationally, whatever, and
Yeah,
it tells me it's hiding my ass.
well,
And it can tell me, like, I can tell that I can say, well, I'm still in Columbus, Ohio, but I may be overseas.
that's the whole idea, yeah. So if you go out of country, you go to some place like China where things are censored, you can use a VPN to tunnel out of China into the US, and you can access things that you wouldn't be able to access if you're out of country.
Now, another question is my iPhone. I have a hotspot, and it has a password, but when it comes up, it says Jinx's, my first name's Jinx, Jinx's iPhone.
Mhm.
So how secure are your hotspots on your iPhone?
Apple takes security really, really seriously. Apple devices are locked down really well.
So
So-
I could just use my hotspot then here at the courthouse.
Yeah, and that's a lot more secure than an open network. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and because there's a password for the hotspot,
Right.
that's not just a password to get on the hotspot, it's also the encryption key,
Okay.
which scrambles the data.
Okay.
So, again, you're good.
Well,
But I would change the name of your iPhone,
well,
because you don't want it to be your name.
Yeah, but I have to figure out how to change the name.
It's
of
in
my-
the settings.
It's in the settings.
Yeah, it's in the
Okay.
settings, yeah. Okay, so let's go on and talk about passwords. You don't want to be low-hanging fruit, so don't use monkey123 as your password, right? I mean, that's, I think, or password 123. So make your passwords long and secure. If the system where you're setting the password allows spaces, add spaces to your password. 2 or more spaces, in other words, a phrase of 3 or more words, is extremely secure. Much more so than a password with no spaces. The problem is a lot of organizations don't yet allow spaces in passwords, but that's coming because security professionals know that makes it much more secure. Has something to do with it's hard to predict where a space would be in a password if somebody is trying to brute force their way into your network. So make your passwords long and strong. Don't use anything that can be guessed, and use a password vault. So you don't want to store your passwords in a text file that says passwords.doc on your computer, because of course when somebody hacks your computer, the first thing they look for are file names that start with the word password. So use a password vault. And what a password vault is an app. You can get it for your phone, and then it also works on Windows, that will keep your passwords encrypted in an encryption container and prevent anybody from harvesting those passwords. LastPass is the password vault I like. There's several. LastPass is free. You can pay for a higher level of service if you want multiple devices. If you want some of the extra features like password sharing in a business, you can set it up so your employees have access to company passwords and that sort of thing. But it's a very good password vault, and they do encryption right. They do what's called hashing and salting, which basically means they encrypt the data, and then they take that data set and they encrypt it again. So it's extremely secure. LastPass had a data breach about 1.5, 2 years ago now, and they sent a notice to all of their users saying that, hey, we've had this data breach, but it doesn't matter because there's no way anybody can get into this this encrypted container of passwords. You're safe. And it's absolutely true. They do it right. But there's some others. There's one called Dashlane. There's one called KeyPass. There's LastPass. There's OnePass. There's RoboForm. There's several of them out there. But use one because it keeps your password safe. And a lot of them, like LastPass, also have a place where you can store secure notes. So if you travel, you could put your passport number in there. You could put your social security number in there. You could put your bank account information in there. It's fully encrypted. Nobody can get to the data. And it uses, these password vaults use what is called trust no one encryption, which means the company doesn't have your password. So there's no way the password can be compromised. Only you have the password to the vault. Which also means if you forget the password, you're done.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so write it on a scrap of paper and put it in your safe. So trust no one encryption is very good from the standpoint that it can't be hacked, but if you forget your password, you got to start over. Okay, and then multi-factor authentication. We're seeing this more and more with web services. That's where you provide not just a username and a password, but you also have to provide something else, usually something you have. So when we talk about multi-factor authentication, there are 3 factors. One is something you know, so that would be a username and a password. The second factor is something you have, usually a cell phone. And then a third factor of authentication is something you are. So a fingerprint or a retina scan, that sort of thing. Most services on the web don't do 3-factor authentication, but most of them now do offer 2-factor authentication. So to log into the system, you have to have a username and password, but you also have to have a secondary way of getting in, which is something you have, a cell phone. That way, if somebody steals your username and password, they can't get into the service unless they've also stolen your cell phone and they know how to open the cell phone, lock screen. And that's extremely unlikely. So any services that you use that support 2-factor or multi-factor authentication, definitely turn it on and use it. Many services like banks and investment firms, any sort of web service that deals with sensitive information already requires 2-factor authentication. So a lot of you probably already done that. But other services, like for example Gmail, it's optional. But I recommend you turn it on everywhere because it just helps secure your account. And updates are important, so you want to always apply your operating system and your app updates whenever they're available. For those of us running a modern version of Windows, which is version 8.0 or higher, Windows updates are automatic, so we don't have to worry about it, it just updates. But the application updates are not more than often. So you want to go through and update your applications like your web browsers, any software that's installed on your computer that's not Windows itself. And just keep those apps up to date because they will be updated as security vulnerabilities are found and patched. And then speaking of Windows, you want to be using Windows 8.1 or above. Windows 8.0, we don't really know what happened to Windows 8.0. Microsoft released it and within just a few months stopped supporting it. There's a lot of speculation as to why. But they immediately updated all the machines that they could automatically update to 8.1. So I doubt that anybody here is still running Windows 8.0. If you are, you definitely want to move to 8.1. Better yet, Windows 10. So Windows 10 is the most recent version of Windows, and there have been several sub-versions that have been released through the years, I think about 8. So the current version of Windows 10 is version 1909.
And is that more secure? I mean, as you update, is it more secure? Or?
Yeah. Windows 10 the back end is way more secure than any previous version of Windows, and each iteration of Windows 10 is just locked down a little more. So you definitely want to use the most recent version of Windows. Windows 7 has a drop dead date of January 14th of this year. And what that means is it'll still work. If any of you are still running Windows 7, it's still going to work, but you'll no longer get security updates. And that's a huge problem, because what'll happen, security updates are published and they're not only freely available to anybody who has Windows, but the details of those security updates are freely available. So the bad guys are looking at these dates. For example, this drop dead date on Windows 7, and the same thing happened when we had the drop dead date on Windows XP. They know what the drop dead date is. They'll go look at the first set of updates that comes out for, in this case, Windows 10 or Windows 8.1. They'll see what was fixed, and they'll know that those same problems were not fixed in Windows 7. So they'll actively try to exploit those vulnerabilities in Windows 7 machines. That narrows their target.
How do they find the Windows 7s?
Compromised routers, typically. If you have a router that's too old or not set up properly, they can come through your router and see your machines.
Okay.
Yep. Yes.
So if you still have 7,
Sure.
what's a good thing to do? Just
You want to go to Windows 10.
Just go in and download the program, or how does that work?
Yeah,
What do you have to do?
it doesn't cost you anything, but you do have to wipe your computer. So you have to back up all your data. You go to the Microsoft, just do a Google search for download Windows 10.
Uh-huh.
You'll download Windows 10, you'll put it on a flash drive. You've got all your data backed up from Windows 7.
Uh-huh.
You'll wipe the computer with the flash drive, install Windows 10, put your data back,
Okay.
and you're ready to go. And it is free. Your Windows 7 product key gives you Windows 10 for free. You don't have to buy it. So, now if you have a version of Windows older than Windows 7, Windows XP, Windows 2000, Windows ME Millennium Edition, a lot of those are so old, I doubt that there are many people running those, but you don't get a free update to Windows 10. You have to buy it. It's about $130 per computer. Yes.
You know, your routers can be connected to a lot of things, like televisions and things like that.
Right.
Netflix, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, can those streaming softwares affect, can viruses come through like Netflix? And Amazon Prime and things like that?
Well, it's possible. Those are online services. Again, those are major names, and so those webmasters are going to, find those infections and fix them quickly. What more often will happen is the device itself has a vulnerability. There's so many different devices out there. Roku is a common device, but you could also go to Amazon and you could buy an Android streaming box. It's a very generic box made in China and probably never gets updates. So there are a lot of, and we call these things IoT devices, or Internet of Things devices. So a streaming box would be an IoT device. A security camera would be an IoT device. Anything that's connected to the internet that's not a computer. And yes, those can be vulnerable.
I heard something about Ring Central. I mean, not Ring Central, but
Ring?
Ring, right?
Yeah, the doorbell. Yep.
Yeah, there's problems coming with that now.
Yeah, and they'll fix those, but that's a good example of how those devices can be vulnerable. And if something gets onto that device that's an infection, now it's inside your network.
It
And
sounds
now,
to me that you need to limit then your devices.
right, and so there's a way of doing that. We call that setting up a VLAN, or a virtual, a VLAN. It stands for Virtual Local Area Network. It's a way of segmenting stuff that could be vulnerable away from your production computers and your backup systems. So it's a good idea to do that because there are more and more of these IoT devices, and they don't have a screen, they don't have a keyboard, they don't have a mouse. How do you know what's in there? How do you know what's on your network lurking around? You don't. You can't run an anti-malware scan on these devices.
It sounds to me, I don't see how the common person, especially my generation, can do all this stuff. I think that,
Yeah, it's tough.
you have to hire an expert like you to come in and fix everything.
Or poke around on Google and just kind of figure it out. Some people do that, but yeah, I stay busy. I do this sort of work. So, I mean, that's part of why I'm trying to boil this all down as best I can so you can understand it, I can compartmentalize it, and you can see what things need to be addressed. But it's a good point. IoT devices are a huge concern.
You're scaring me.
Well, that's good. If we're all scared about IT security, we're going to make good choices, and we're not going to take chances. So that's a good thing. If you really want to get scared, listen to the Security Now podcast on the Tech TV network, or the TWiT TV network. It's scary. The stuff that's out there and the companies that get hacked, there's so many hacking incidents that just never make the news because they're so commonplace. And it's a big concern. But these are things that we can do to minimize our risk because, again, you just don't want to be that low-hanging fruit. You don't want to be that person with a 10-year-old router and your password of monkey123 because you're going to get hacked.
Well, what happens if you get hacked? And you said this, it says ransomware, everything's got shut down. What's the first thing you do? I just turn my computer off.
Yeah, you want to unplug everything. Yeah, disconnect your network, and you have to start working on the machines one at a time to clean them up. And you really need to call a security professional to do that. So, but speaking of ransomware, it's a big threat. Yes, Kathy?
Well, I was thinking on the security segments, like the fingerprint.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, can't that work two ways? You use your fingerprint to get on your phone, but now Google knows your fingerprint. And can a lot of people get your fingerprint?
To some extent, you have to have faith in these services
Right.
and that they're not going to use the information for bad. That's the world we live in. We live in a cloud-connected type of internet ecosystem, and we just have to have faith that these, so the companies that you want to interface with, you need to make sure they're reputable companies, So, Google monetizes everything by using your data. I mean, that's, big data is a big thing now, and companies will pay for the big data that's collected on all of us. It has value.
So what's the best search engine to use then, other than Google?
Well, I'll tell you what I like is any of the search engines that utilize Google but don't identify you, that hide you. And one of those is called DuckDuckGo.
DuckDuckGo.
Yep. So it's based on Google, but there's a barrier. They don't send any personal identifiable information. They don't send any telemetry back to Google. It's just you do the search and nobody knows who you are, where you are doing it. Nobody knows what you searched for.
So do you go into Google to find DuckDuck?
No, just type it directly in your address bar.
Okay.
DuckDuckGo.com. And there's some others like that. That's the one I use. So.
And then once you get that on the computer, you don't use Microsoft Edge or Google or any of those other services.
No, you're still going to pick whatever browser you want to use.
Oh.
But instead of going to google.com to do your search, you can go to duckduckgo.com.
And they don't collect data on you.
That's right. Yep. So.
Good question, good answer.
Yeah, so I mean, some people are really concerned about the data that Google and Yahoo and Microsoft collect, and you just hope they're not using it for bad intent.
I think one thing I have done, I don't use Google Gmail. I pay for my USA.net.
Okay.
It's Silver Sky system or something, in which you have 24-hour support. And I think your email, especially as an attorney, is very critical.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think using just a Google Gmail address or a Yahoo address, I think you're opening yourself up. I mean, you get it for what you pay for.
Yeah.
What do you use?
I use USA.net.
I mean, what is?
I use Google G Suite, which is the business version of Google that you pay for, and you can connect your own private domain to Google G Suite and get email that way. My domain is sqsystems.com, so that's my email address instead of being at gmail.com.
Is that GOOGLEGSUITE?
No, just the letter G, space suite.
Oh, space.
Yeah, and it costs about $60 per year per user. So if you have a law firm with 5 people, you're going to pay $300 a year.
But that
For the
provides
service.
you all that extra level of securities on your emails going back and forth.
It does, and Google actually is one of the better email services at filtering out really bad stuff. So ransomware, infected emails, emails with really any kind of malware, virus, Trojan, worm, anything that's nasty. Google does a great job at filtering that out. Much better than Microsoft does, by the way. Microsoft is I have clients that use Microsoft Office 365, and they get malware that comes in by email, malicious emails, and there's always an employee somewhere that clicks on a link they shouldn't have, and then we have a problem. That stuff is much more difficult to come through Gmail.
What about Yahoo? Are they? I was hacked many years ago.
Yahoo has a bad reputation because of they had really lax security for a lot of years. That's been fixed. So Yahoo is much more secure now, but for a lot of years, it was pretty easy for hackers to hack a Yahoo account. A cousin of mine in Kansas had her Yahoo account hacked. She couldn't do anything because they got in. Not only did they change her password, they changed all the responses to her secret questions. So she couldn't prove who she was. She was done. She just had to open a new email address. And the bad news is then the hacker had all of her contacts from her address book.
So when they hacked me, they stole all my contacts and erased them, and they erased 3 years of emails.
So another good reason why it's a good idea to use two-factor authentication, because it makes it much more difficult, if not impossible, for hackers to get into your account. So.
Well, I think you kind of hit on one of the major things, though, when you said like the people that use 365 or whatever, and some employee or somebody, clicks on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the training part of it. Right?
Yes.
Because you can't do that enough. You can't.
No. Yeah, be suspicious of everything.
Yeah.
Don't assume that what you're looking at is legitimate and click on a link. It's so hard to do, I know, because it's so easy to click on that link instead of retyping it in the address bar.
Yeah.
But that's how a lot of people get bit. And there's something called a drive-by infection now, which is when you visit a website that's infected, you don't have to click anything. Just by visiting that website, your machine can be infected. So that's another reason why we want to keep our browsers up to date, because it's a constant game of cat and mouse between the people that write software that's internet facing and the bad guys that are trying to exploit that software. So if we keep our software patched, that's the best we can do with that software to, keep the bad guys out. So we talked about the drop dead date in Windows 7. That's important. Update to Windows 10 if you haven't yet.
Do we have to update by January 14th or whatever date we get?
Well, shortly after. So Windows pushes updates out on the second Tuesday of every month. So the second Tuesday of February is when you'll really be vulnerable. That's when all the updates come out, and that's when the bad guys are going to know what isn't fixed in Windows 7. And that's when they're going to start their campaign of targeting Windows 7 machines. So.
Don't tell me you still use Windows 7.
Well, no, I don't, but I do have a couple laptops that I kept Windows 7 on because I really liked it.
Oh, there are a lot of people that still are using it. It's a problem. Yeah, it's a real problem.
Windows 7.
Yeah.
There's several.
I have a friend.
I have a friend.
No, I mean, it still
I didn't want to
still
give it
works.
up.
I still have it
I
on
don't
a
think-
laptop at home too.
Yeah.
That's why.
And it's familiar and it's stable.
Laptop at home.
Well, I thought it was more user-friendly too.
A lot of people like it better. There are apps that you can download that make Windows 10 look and act a little more like Windows 7. Yeah, so you
What do
can
they
kind of.
call
There's one called Classic Shell. It's free, but it's legitimate. It's not infected. It's a good program. It makes your start menu look like a Windows 7 start menu instead of a Windows 10 start menu. A lot of people like that.
But I mean, 10's not bad once you get used to it.
Once you get
it's
used to
not
it,
bad.
a little bit of a
It's
learning
not a
curve,
problem.
but
It's just I was having so much trouble with 8 that I.
yeah, and that's
Well,
why
yeah.
10 got a bad reputation because Windows 8 the interface was so bad. They really tried to make your Windows computer act more like a Windows tablet, and people hated that. And it was a terrible idea, especially in business. Why would you want to do
It's
that?
better just to buy an Apple, Mac.
Oh, that's a whole nother discussion. Yes.
Steve, I don't mean to object here, but we've got a lot more to cover. And
I know.
Runoff stream, so I only got 25 minutes.
Yeah, we're not going to get through it all. So
I'd
that's
prefer
why,
to get through it.
absolutely, take it home. But yeah, so let's quickly go through some of these other items. So malware scans. MRT is a malware scanner that's built into Windows that most people don't know about because there's no menu item for it. But you do want to run that periodically. It stands for Malware Removal Toolkit. To run that, you'll click the Start button and just type MRT and hit Enter, and it'll come up. I don't know why there's no menu item for it, but it's a good product. You want to use it periodically. Windows Defender is the antivirus that's built into Microsoft Windows. It's very good. And so if you're buying a Windows antivirus solution, let it expire. Don't buy it again. Just use what's built into Windows. So if you uninstall any add-on antivirus application you have, Windows Defender that's built into Windows will simply start working. It's very good. Change your default app passwords on all your IoT devices. So any device or computer that's connected to the internet, always change the password from its default password to something that's long and strong that nobody can guess. Port scans, we can talk about this just quickly. There's a product called Shields Up by Gibson Research. You can do a Google search for it. That'll tell you if you have any holes in your firewall. Firewall's built into your router.
It's called what?
Shields Up.
It's on the list here.
Yeah. Okay, backups, versioning, air-gapped backups, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so backups are important. We talk about 1, 2, 3 when it comes to backups. And that means you want to have, I'm sorry, it's 3, 2, 1. I wrote it backwards. You want to have 3 copies of your data, 2 different types of media, 1 off-site. So what I recommend you do is use a cloud backup service like Carbonite or oh gosh, there's so many of them. Carbonite's the one I use. There's one called Big Oak. There's one called Mozy, M-O-Z-Y. There's Wasabi. Anyway, use a cloud backup service because it keeps your data off-site in case of fire, theft, or flood. It keeps it secure behind a firewall, and it's available anywhere. And look for a cloud backup service that does, again, what we talked about, trust no one encryption, where you create the encryption key and they don't have it. So they don't have the password to your data. That's important. Air-gapped backups, that's using an external hard drive. So if you plug a hard drive into your machine and just drag and drop your data to that hard drive, or use a Windows backup program to copy data to the little hard drive, that's good, because it gives you a backup that's right there at arm's reach, but you want to air gap that backup, which means when you're not backing up, unplug it. That way the bad guys can't get to it and damage it. And I recommend having 2. You just swap them. Keep one in a media safe or keep it in your car, right? And then keep one plugged into the computer, and then once a week switch them. If you're going to take one out of the house, you want to make sure that that hard drive is encrypted. You can buy hard drives that come with encryption software, and that way if somebody steals a hard drive out of your car, they can't get to your data because they don't know the encryption key. So, and versioning is important. So what that means is when you're running your backups, don't have just one copy on the backup drive, because if you have a document, for example, and you're editing the document and you remove several paragraphs and maybe you remove too much, the next day you realize, oh, I'm missing more data than I need. You go to your backup and now the backup's backed up. Its only copy is now the one that doesn't have that data. So you want to do what's called versioning, and better backup software will have that as a feature, and oftentimes it's automatically turned on. It lets you go back in time and see what that document looked like at different points in time. Yeah, so you can go back and retrieve something that has already been modified. Okay, remove dangerous apps, including, and these are the 3 biggies: Flash, Shockwave, and QuickTime for Windows. These are high-profile applications that are just full of security holes that will never be fixed, and you don't want to be using these in Windows. don't confuse QuickTime for Windows with QuickTime for Mac. It's the same product, it's just that there's a Mac version and there's a Windows version. Apple is very good at keeping things secure. QuickTime for Mac is very good. They've abandoned QuickTime for Windows. That's why it's no longer safe to use for Windows. So if you have those three programs, any of those three programs on your computer, definitely remove them. The last item, next to the last item on that list, is probably one of the best things you can do. So when you're using your computer day to day, don't use an administrator account, because an administrator account has full access to anything on that computer. It can do anything. It's like a super user. So your day-to-day account in Windows that you log into when you use your computer should be a standard or limited account, which means it has no super user privileges. And the reason that's important is because if all of these things that we've done fail for some reason and an infection does get onto your machine, that infection will inherit whatever user rights you have as a user. So you don't want an infection to have super user rights, because then it can run amok and do anything it wants to. If the username that you're logged into Windows is a limited account and doesn't have administrator privileges, then the virus or the infection also doesn't have administrator privileges, and the damage will be very limited. And always have an administrator computer account, but only use it when you need to, say to install new software, to remove software, to make major system changes, that sort of thing. And then day to day use your limited or your standard account. And then SMB, this is something that you'll find, this is a communication protocol that you'll find on a lot of office copiers, these big copiers that are, copiers, scanners, fax machines. They use an older version. SMB is short for server messaging blocks. It's a way for a device to communicate with a server or with another computer. Microsoft has said SMB 1.0 is hopelessly flawed, and they will be applying no more updates to SMB 1.0. So SMB version 2 and version 3 are much safer. The problem is a lot of these older copiers that are still in use in businesses still use SMB 1.0. And so ideally you would replace that copier with something newer. If you can't, talk to your copier support people. There is an alternative protocol called FTP that they can set up for you that's much safer than SMB 1.0. So just be aware that it's a serious problem in small business right now, because there's so many copiers out there that are older that are still very useful that only use SMB 1.0. So that's really the main things you want to do to secure your network and your devices. So it's a pretty comprehensive list. But first thing you want to do is check your router, I think. Go through those options there. So let's talk about some of the different security threats, because there's so many different ones. Some of them are minor, some of them are major, and then there's all sorts of stuff in between. The more traditional security threats are malware, adware, scumware, crapware. These are just programs that do something that you don't want them to do. They'll serve up ads to you that could be malicious, could harvest data, that could spy on you. There could be something called a Trojan, which is something that is part of a program that you legitimately want to use. You download the program, it does whatever it is that it's supposed to do, and it does it well, but there's this sidecar, there's this Trojan that comes along with it that you don't know about, that's now doing something bad in the background. Well, Windows Defender catches a lot of this stuff. Antivirus will catch a lot of that stuff there. But the second one down, ransomware, this is more difficult. So what ransomware does is it gets into your computer, usually through phishing or spear phishing, which is down here. We'll talk about that a little more, but you'll get an email that has a malicious link. It looks legitimate, you click the link, and ransomware now gets into your computer. What it does is it scrambles your data silently in the background. You don't know what's happening. Once it's done, on the screen you get a ransom note. And it'll say, we've scrambled your data. You have 10 days to pay us $3,000 or your data is gone. And these ransomware infections are extremely well written because the ransomware industry is extremely well funded because people are paying these ransoms. So they're able to hire talented programmers to perpetrate this stuff, and it's a huge, huge concern. And that's a lot of what you hear about in the news these days. It's very high profile. Ransomware crooks will typically go after municipalities, county government, that sort of thing, because they know that governmental agencies have ransomware insurance, and so they're likely to get their money because their ransomware insurance policy will kick in and the bad guys will get paid. But anybody can be targeted with ransomware. So again, just be careful. Don't click on things unless you're absolutely sure they're safe. And then viruses should be coupled with the first line item up there. Viruses are a little more serious than malware, adware, scumware, and crapware, but it's a more traditional threat where it'll interrupt your work, it'll possibly damage data. Viruses can, there's a type of virus called a rootkit that can hide from your antivirus and do bad things. Just know that they're out there. Physical breaches are a problem. So if you're in an office that has a reception desk and your office is exposed to the public, somebody could physically walk in and sit down at a machine, without you seeing them, and the machine is open and they can do whatever they want to do. Tailgating is where this normally happens in larger businesses, where there'll be a group of people congregating outside. They're on a break, right? And this person will come and join the group. Nobody knows this person, but it's a large company. That person then walks into the building with everybody else, getting past doors that have, key card entrances. They're just walking in as a group, and then this person will sit down at a computer that's not in use and do their bad stuff. So this is not something that typically happens in a small business because you know everybody. But in a larger organization, this can happen, and they can come in undetected. Botnets are internet networks of infections. The whole idea with a botnet is these bad guys will harvest processing power on millions of different computers around the world and collect that processing power to mount attacks. And quite often, botnets are used to mount attacks against state governments. So botnets are a big problem. Crypto mining is a process by which an infection gets on your machine and it starts mining cryptocurrency. So there are a lot of cryptocurrencies out there. Bitcoin is the most common, but there's Monero and there's several. Well, this cryptocurrency has value, and there are these trading houses where you can trade in cryptocurrency for US dollars. So they actually have value. So bad guys will try to harvest your processing power to mine this currency. It's mined electronically by solving equations. Phishing and spear phishing, that's the most common way that people get infected. That's where an email comes in. Phishing means it's an email that's sent to a bunch of people. They're trying to get you to click on a link. Spear phishing is more targeted at a single person, and a spear phishing attack will usually have information in the email that makes the email extremely convincing. So they might drop the name of somebody that person knows. Again, the most common way of getting infected. Phone support scams. Somebody will call you and say, "This is Microsoft, your machine is infected. We need access to your machine and we'll clean it up." They're fake. Microsoft isn't going to call you and tell you that your machine is infected. One of the reasons phone support scams can be so convincing is a lot of overseas telephone support services will engage in fraud after hours. So these are people that are trained as telephone support specialists. They know what to say. They're very professional sounding because they do legitimate support during the day and then perpetrate this fraud after hours. So be aware of that. Two of the newer threats, bogus calendar invites and bogus file sharing invites. So if you get a calendar invite for a meeting from somebody that you know but doesn't look quite right, maybe you weren't sure this meeting was coming up, and you accept that calendar invite, it could be infecting your machine. So if you have any doubt at all, get the person on the phone. Say, "Hey, did you send me a calendar invite?" And the same thing for file sharing invites. Somebody sends you an email. wanting to share a file with you. It's a business file. Maybe it says, budget.xls. Oh, that's something I'm expecting, or that's something I may be interested in looking at, but it's bogus. And you accept the file sharing invite, you open the file, and then you're infected. So calendar invites and file sharing invites can be extremely convincing in part because the from address in an email can be forged very easily. So it can be from somebody you know, but it's not really from that person. And so that just makes it more convincing and more likely that you might fall for it. So just be aware that the from address, it's very easy to forge. Doesn't mean it really came from that person. Mobile number theft is becoming more and more of a problem because of two-factor authentication. So we talked about having a second factor of authentication and how it makes your accounts more secure because the crook isn't likely to have your username and password and your phone. But what if they can steal your phone number and put it on their own phone? Now they do have your phone, right? So mobile number theft happens when somebody contacts your cell phone carrier, pretends to be you, convinces the support person that they are you. They then take your phone number to a new carrier, to their own account, and now they have your phone number on their phone. And if they've stolen your username and password, and they have essentially your phone now because they've stolen your number, now they can get into all your services. So that's a huge problem. I know that because I had my number stolen about a year and a half ago. Somebody opened a fraudulent Home Depot account in my name, and they authenticated as me by stealing my phone number. So anyway, so just be aware. And you'll know that your phone number has been stolen because your phone will stop working. You won't be able to connect to your cellular network. So the best bet to do there is contact your cellular provider and ask them what security you have on your account. And oftentimes they won't have a verbal password listed. Ask them to add a verbal password. And that's a password that whomever would need to give them verbally on the phone to be able to transfer your number to another provider. So, plenty of threats out there to worry about. And some of this I think we've gone over, but securing your cloud accounts. The cloud doesn't need to be confusing. All the cloud means is it's somebody else's computer. You've got data or you've got a service that's running on a computer that's not yours. That's all it means. There's some really big cloud providers, Microsoft, IBM, Amazon, Google. A lot of these companies have cloud platforms where you can store data. You can run applications through the cloud on their service and that sort of thing. Public versus private cloud. So the difference there is a public cloud is a cloud you set up yourself. It's only for you or your company. And it would be, there's a product called OwnCloud, for example, and you can set up your own cloud presence on a little machine in your office, and then you can access that from wherever you are in the world. That's called private cloud. Public cloud is where you subscribe to a service from Google or Amazon or any of the other cloud providers, and you use their service. It doesn't mean the data is available to the public, it just means that the service is publicly available. And then we talked about strong passwords and using MFA, multi-factor authentication. Sometimes you'll see it called 2FA for two-factor authentication. So definitely turn that on and use it if your services support it. Oh yeah, look for unknown or forgotten shares. So if you have a small business and you don't have an IT person, you might have set up a file share on one of your computers to share data with maybe an intern that did some work for you at one time. It's easy to forget about those file shares. And if they're forgotten about, they could be accessed without your knowledge or consent. So if you set it up, you'll know how to turn it off. If you didn't set it up, then it's not there to worry about.
What about Dropbox?
Dropbox can be safe. Again, you want to turn on two-factor authentication. They support it. And data...
Also, you can share data with other people
And you can revoke those shares. So same thing, if you have a forgotten share that maybe you share data with somebody you collaborate with, and then the project is over, the case is resolved, whatever, you want to go back and turn that share off.
But can they infect your computer somehow if their computer's infected and that's sharing?
Not through Dropbox.
Okay.
No. Because again, like a lot of cloud services, Dropbox has a firewall that prevents malicious software from running. Yep. Now, there could be something in there that you download that's disguised as a document, and you download it to your machine and then you try to open it. There could be a macro that'll try to run and cause you a problem. But Dropbox, like a lot of services, they also actively monitor with antivirus software and look for problems. So,
The biggest thing I've seen with Dropbox problems is people who receive the Dropbox, they weren't really expecting it, but they go in and they open it anyway, and that's where some of the things you mentioned.
yeah, so that's a type
there,
of phishing.
something like that.
Exactly.
It's just another form of phishing.
Right, yeah.
And
It's a
so-
bogus file share request,
So again, I mean, it's the common sense kind of thing. You weren't expecting a Dropbox, or you thought you were going to get the documents, but I didn't think they'd be coming this soon.
Right,
So, picking
right.
up the phone and saying to the person, hey, did you send that? Is this really from you? Instead of just clicking away, it's a lot easier to make that 1 minute phone call or
Yep.
whatever than it is.
Or walk down the hall and poke your head in somebody's
Yeah,
office and
you
say,
know,
hey, did you send this?
Yeah.
Yeah, be suspicious of everything. Yep, absolutely.
Because it's not the Dropbox program that's bad, it's the way that
It's what can be there,
Yeah.
right. There's another service that is much more secure than Dropbox for business called ShareFile. And that's published by Citrix. And they're a big, big name in internet connectivity and security. So it's more expensive, but ShareFile is much more secure for business use than is Dropbox. So, okay. So we've talked about having that cell phone and why that's important is two-factor authentication, but why are two-factor codes through SMS or text messaging no longer recommended? Well, it's because text messages are sent in the clear. They're not encrypted. Somebody could intercept that message, get the code, and pretend to be you. So a lot of companies, including Google, have come out with authenticator apps that you can download to your phone. And it uses technology called TOTP, or a trusted one-time passcode, and or sometimes called time-based one-time passcode. And that's a little safer. So if your service supports two-factor authentication and the support TOTP, use that. And we talked about the verbal password with your cell phone carrier, and we talked about using a password vault like LastPass. So these are all things you can do to secure your cloud accounts. All good things to do. Securing your small office network. I think we covered most of this already. Yeah, we did. Really, the only thing we didn't talk about in much depth was the IoT devices. A lot of these devices, they're like routers, they're commodities, and so a lot of them, especially the ones made in China, will never get firmware updates and will never be secure. So it is a good idea to keep those off your main network, keep them on what's called a VLAN, a virtual local area network, so that they can't interact with your production computers. And then the human firewall. This really is just what we've been talking about. You know, all of these things that we need to be aware of and be suspicious of. It's really the biggest asset in a company is training your people to be suspicious of these things and to question everything. We call it the human firewall. And that is really one of the best things you can do to make your office environment secure. So, and there are lots of online security awareness programs that you can subscribe to and have your employees take for some training. It's becoming big, big business. So I think we're almost out of time here. A lot of this is just rehashing some of what we've already talked about, but securing your mobile environment. Oh, do we really need antivirus on our mobile devices? Not really, because they're not nearly as vulnerable as Windows, especially Apple devices running iOS. You don't need antivirus. So don't buy it. It's a waste of money. But use strong passcodes to open your device. Mobile device encryption, unless you have an old phone, it's, when you set it up, it is going to be encrypted by default. So that's really not a concern unless you're using a really old phone. And if you are, you want to, if it's more than 4 or 5 years old, get rid of it and get something newer. Laptop encryption. Windows has a system called BitLocker, and that will encrypt your laptop hard drive in case it gets stolen. People can't read your data and your sensitive information off the hard drive. So turn that on if you're not using it. And we talked about the VPNs. Use VPNs because they do encrypt your data and prevent people from knowing where you are geographically, especially in open networks that don't have a password. VPNs are good. Hotspot Shield, TunnelBear, ExpressVPN, those are the three top ones that I've heard talked about. I use ExpressVPN. You use one called Hide My Ass.
Yeah, it's a very popular
Yeah,
program.
just because of the
you
name.
can't remember the name.
Yeah, right. The problem with some VPN services is they can leak data and you don't know it. You just don't know what's leaking. So you need to use one that's reputable, that's been audited by security professionals that you know works. These three are highly recommended by security professionals, and none of them leak data. Any questions? Yes.
Go ahead.
I have a question. We have a Wi-Fi and a small one in our little office, and there was a hotel across the street. And they must have had a very powerful Wi-Fi network or something, but it was interfering with ours.
You're welcome.
Now, they've since knocked the hotel down, so
Oh,
I'm going
okay.
to redevelop, so it stopped, but it would periodically interfere with ours. What would have caused that? Like, what,
When you say interfere, meaning it's hard for you to connect to your own?
to connect to our own, and we'd often get theirs. If I was doing something on a computer, next thing I knew, I was on their Wi-Fi network instead of ours.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not saying it destroyed ours, but we were on theirs.
Yeah. Well, and the traditional solution to poor Wi-Fi coverage is you boost the signal with a signal booster. And that's the sort of thing that causes this problem. And so that's not done much anymore. Really, you want your signal to be weaker, not stronger, because you don't want people outside your four walls getting into your network. But a lot of hotels and other organizations will boost the signal like that, and it does become a problem. One of the things you can do is move your Wi-Fi to a different frequency.
Okay?
Use high band, which is the 5 gigahertz frequency. Newer routers will support the 5 gigahertz frequency. It's much less congested than the old low band, which is 2.4 gigahertz.
Okay.
So if you have a modern router that they call it dual band, use the higher frequency, and that reduces congestion. Now, the higher frequency the signal, the more propensity that signal has to bounce off walls. But that's kind of what you want, right? You don't want it to penetrate your walls and to have somebody outside your four walls getting access. So 5 gigahertz is a good way to go. Look for a dual band router and use that frequency. Anything else? Yes.
This is specifically with regard to the library. I have Nexus, but I don't have the full access. I have a limited subscription.
Right.
And so like today, kill some time. I did some legal research, sent it to my email. How protected is for me to, send, that I'm using your computers here at the law library. How secure is this computer to send things to my email account?
Well, we believe they're secure, but treat them as public computers. They may not be secure. So what you would want to do, if you have sensitive information there, you want to encrypt that file.
How do I? Okay, I'm doing research today. Found some forms I wanted that I did not have in my plan. Sent it to my USA.net, which is a very high secure.
Okay.
It's not like a Gmail account or whatever. And when I open that, how am I going to know that I'm not transferring a virus from the law library to my computer?
Well, you don't know for sure. I can say that our systems are secure here, but I would say don't assume that they are, because you may be somewhere where systems are not secure. So what you would want to do, you download the file, you ask for that file. That file you downloaded that you see in the download folder is what you ask for. then you want to encrypt that file. We have a program on our computers called 7-Zip. And you can run that and encrypt that file, give it a password that only you know. Now you take that encrypted file, email it. If it's intercepted, nobody can get to it, nobody can modify it because they don't have the password. Then when you get home and you access your email and you download it to your personal computer, you unencrypt it.
So I download the file to your computer.
Let's say to the desktop or to the download folder.
Okay.
Yep.
And then from the download folder, what do I do to send that to my email?
Okay, so this is more of a specific set of directions, but you'll right-click on it, left-click 7-Zip, and there's an option in there to create an archive and give it a password.
In your download process.
It's when you go to the folder, after you've gone to the folder.
I
after
create a
you,
folder for this.
Yeah, well, you go to the, say, the download folder, if that's where you save the file.
Do we need a 7-Zip app or something, or like?
It's on our computers. You can download it freely at home. It's legitimate. It's open source, so it's been audited. We know that there's nothing malicious in there, and it lets you encrypt passwords with very strong encryption, files with very strong encryption, using a password of your choice.
Do you have a document here for your users at the law library that gives you written instructions on how to do these things?
It's a good idea. We should probably come up with something that might be useful. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, since you're the IT person here, how can we even, because I just sent it to my email.
Yeah, and that's what most people do. But you make a good point. So, yeah, I think it is a good idea.
Okay, another
Great.
If
question.
you're dealing with Lexis or Westlaw, it's not necessary. If you're looking at, if the client gives you a flash drive, you don't know where that flash drive
That's right.
has been.
Yeah.
That's more where that's needed.
That's
but
more of a risk,
Things
yeah.
things that are coming from Lexis or Westlaw are not, they're very protected.
Can I bring my own flash drive that is just clean? I use it for the law library. Do you have a thing that I can push it into, downloading to a flash drive, my legal research here?
If it's your flash drive and you know it's not infected, sure, that's a great way to do it.
We encourage people to bring their flash drives because we don't charge document delivery fees for flash drives. So if you're somebody who prints out and you instead choose to download the case or the statute to your flash drive, there's no charge for that.
Is that flash drive in every computer unit?
Yeah, there's a USB drive. Yes,
Can we close out this program, and then if people have questions, maybe it'll be available afterwards?
sure. That works for me. Absolutely. Any other questions?
One more question, I checked my email.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sure. Glad to do it. Sure.
I checked my
This is
email.
always helpful.
I checked my
You're welcome.
email